Hey guys, Zarvis here with another video for Warhammer Online, Return of Reckoning, the Age of Reckoning private server. This is part 7 in a series that we're doing on the various archetypes and classes in Warhammer Online. We already did part 1 and 2 on Order Industrial Range DPS, part 3 and 4 on the melee DPS for both sides, part 5 and 6 on the healers, and finally we're moving on to part 7 and 8 now on the tank classes for both Order and Destruction. So, the 3 Order tanks that they get are the Swordmaster, the Knight of the Blazing Sun, and the Ironbreaker. So let's start it off right at the back with the Swordmaster. So, Swordmaster, they are a tank class, or they can be kind of a bruiser class. They deal either physical damage or spirit melee type damage. This is huge for them because being able to do magic damage is way better than physical for the most part. In this game, physical mitigation can go up to 75% before it reaches the soft cap. For resist, they go up to about 40% before they hit the soft cap. So right there, by doing a lot of spirit type damage, they unlock a lot more potential. What kind of armor do they use? They all use heavy armor, so a heavy armor class. Most armor in the game. They can either use a sword and shield, becoming more of a shield master, or they can wield a two-handed, awesome-looking blade like this, and yeah, they look pretty amazing. What are the strengths of the Swordmaster? So, Swordmaster has some of the highest damage output of potential of all the tank classes for both Order and Destruction. Because of that spirit damage we were talking about earlier, some great ability uses, they can put out a ton. As close as you can maybe get to playing a tank class, they can also push really good damage. They get fantastic group utility tools. They get a great kit in either their shield or their sword build, so two-handed sword build, so great utility tools. They have some pretty decent mobility as well between their regular abilities and their tactics and morale abilities. So good mobility, and they got the largest swords in the game. And for some people, size matters, and Swordmasters have it big. What are the weaknesses of the Swordmaster? Their shield spec can be a little bit underwhelming compared to the other tanks on Order side because of the strength of their two-handed build. It's a hard ask to make them go shield spec. Even though they do get some great group utility, you're missing out by not having that damage potential. Maybe not as favored as the Ironbreaker Knight in some cases. While the Ironbreaker is harder to play, a well-played Ironbreaker is very, very good in that kind of setting, and Knight is always good. So maybe not as favored overall, unless they're in the right type group, and some people might not enjoy playing a tank class that wears a dress, but that's more up to individual choice. What is their mechanic? So they got the Blade Dance, which is kind of like a combo system. Basically, the way this works is you have some weaker abilities that will, you'll fire off first. It'll unlock stronger abilities and finally unlock, finisher type abilities. So you start at normal balance, you use abilities, get into improved balance, and finally into expert balance. And then once you use finisher type ability, you start the loop over again. What are the specializations on the Swordmaster? They got the Path of Cain. This is where you're going to get your offensive type abilities and your great sword abilities. You have your Path of Ball. This is where you're going to get your shield spec kind of abilities and defensive tactics and morales. And then finally got your Path of Hoeth. This is where you're going to get group buffs, utility, and crowd control. What are some of the classifying abilities of the Swordmaster? They have Whispering Winds. This does damage to your target. It silences them for 5 seconds, and it also decreases the cooldowns on all abilities for your group mates for a period of time. And this can be very strong. I mean, there are a lot of great abilities in this game that have 5 to 10 seconds cooldowns. When you fire off that cooldown decreaser, it can vastly improve your defensive or offensive nature of both yourself and your party mates. Ether Dance, this is a channel ability. You hit your target 5 times in 3 seconds. It does fantastic damage. It is good burst. One of the major abilities that unlocks the Swordmaster's damage potential. You have your Protection of Hoeth. This is a group bubble type spell. Everyone in your party will get a bubble. You can use this every 10 seconds, absorb 800 to 1,000 damage each. Great at keeping your group alive, and it's a must-needed utility when your healers need some help. And finally, one extra one for the Swordmaster, they get their Wings of Heaven. This is a Morale 2 ability, kind of a special unlock in combat. It lets you fly 100 feet to your target. You jump towards them, on top of them, and then everyone nearby as well as your target is reduced by, their run speed is reduced by 60%. They're snared for a period of time as well, and they cannot cleanse this snare, so undefendable snare, great at locking down some backline healers, assisting off a white line or a shadow warrior, gives them some great mobility. What kind of play is the Swordmaster good in? This kind of applies to all the tanks. They are great in groups, they're great in scenarios, great in rank, great in warbands. They fall apart a little bit going solo. I mean, they can be easily kited by most classes, but otherwise great at most types of play. If you're playing a tank, people will want you pretty much anytime, everywhere. All right. Moving on to the next one in the list, this is the Empire tank. It is the Knight of the Blazing Sun. So, Knight of the Blazing Sun, let's go right into it. They are also, a tank type class that can do either physical melee damage or elemental melee damage with a tactic. They have heavy armor as well. You can see the plate right there. Most armor in the game. They can use either a sword and shield, or they can use a two-handed greatsword as well. What are the strengths of the Knight of the Blazing Sun? They are one of the easiest tank classes in the game to pick up and learn, one of the easiest classes in general. They don't really have a very complicated mechanic or a mechanic really at all. So you can just jump right in. You don't have to worry about learning or a skill floor. You can go right into it. They get amazing group auras that both buff your allies and weaken your enemies. Throw these on at the start of the fight or when you get into a scenario or open world, and just let them help your team out. Most of their abilities can be used in either shield or two-handed build. So unlike some of the other tanks where you miss out on a bunch of abilities if you're not using shield or not using a sword, they can use everything except maybe one or two abilities in both sword and shield and two-handed build, giving them a lot of variety and a lot of options. So that's some of the strengths of the Knight of the Blazing Sun. What are their weaknesses? They have lower damage output potential than most of the other tanks, especially on Order side. Swordmaster and Ironbreaker will typically do a lot more damage, so if you're trying to play it as a bruiser type class, you might be a little bit disappointed with that. Their class mechanics are powerful, but they're also kind of boring, as we said. You turn them on, and that's pretty much it. Back on live, you would have to cycle them, and they would fade, and you'd have to put new ones on. On this server, you just throw them on, and they're there. Strong, but kind of a little bit boring. And also, some of their gear, while looking awesome, can be quite feathery, and for some people, that is a major turnoff. What is their class mechanic? Commands. They have their battle commands, so you can have up to 3 up at one time. These will either buff your teammates, maybe give them a damage aura, or it would give them increased chance to critically hit or AP, and you also have ones you can turn on that will debuff the enemy, lower their resist or some of their stats. Very strong as well. What are the specializations on the Knight of the Blazing Sun? They have their Path of Conquest. This is where they're going to get their offensive type abilities and commands. They have their Path of Vigilance. This is going to be more defensive type commands and abilities. And finally, they have their Path of Glory. This is going to be more about debuffs, crowd control, utility. You can get your stagger in this line. This is more of support type abilities, aiding the other lines. What are some classifying abilities of the Knight of the Blazing Sun? They have the Vigilance, so this is a buff you can put on yourself. It reduces your damage by 50% that you take, which is amazing, and it reduces your damage output at the same time, but you can get a tactic that takes that part away. So you can have pretty much half, 50% uptime on taking 50% less damage from all sources. Heaven's Fury, this is the crowd control we were talking about. In a cone in front of you, up to 40 feet away, all your targets there will get mesmerized for 3 seconds. Great utility in a group setting. Great for locking down some backline healers or catching someone. Not a bad ability. And finally, they get Repel Darkness. This is a damage and a massive knockback on the enemy. This is one of the highest verticality of any knockbacks in the game. So very good at locking someone out of the fight and knocking them back for an extended period of time. Again, what kind of play are they good at? Just like the Swordmaster, they are good at group, scenario, ranked, warband. Soloing, not so much, but every other kind of play, PvE, they are very, very good. And finally, last but definitely not least, maybe the shortest, the Ironbreaker. So let's go into the Ironbreaker. Ironbreaker is, again, a tank class dealing physical melee damage. So unlike the Knight or the Swordmaster, they don't get the potential to really unlock a magical type of damage dealing. They wear heavy armor. They can either use like an axe or hammer in one hand and a shield in the other, or they can wield a two-handed great hammer weapon. What are the strengths of the Ironbreaker? They are the highest skill cap, but also means that they have the highest potential of any of the other tanks. Where some of the others, you have a very typical bread and butter type build. For the way that the Ironbreaker works, a lot of it is put on the player for their choice of how they're gonna, fire things off, in what order, at what, where in your mechanic you're going to do it. And while it can be difficult to learn, when it's played well, it is amazing to see. They have a great toolkit of abilities in two-handed or shield builds, so strong reasons to go one or the other. A great class mechanic, something that actually makes you want to play the class, and you know that you have the control in your hand. And they have some amazing ability names, things like Grumble and Mutter and Watch and Learn. So, kind of an amusing class also. What are the weaknesses? So back to that skill cap thing, they are very hard to learn and play well. You'll see a lot of mediocre type Iron Breakers out there in the world. It can make the class seem worse than it is, but when you see one play it right, it's really good to see, but you gotta be willing to put in the time and learn how to do it. Another weakness is maybe that with so many choices and so many options, it can lead to indecision in combat and making the wrong call and knowing that the fight is lost, whereas another class had one choice in that situation and it would have beaten them. You chose wrong and now you're done. They can be overlooked sometimes compared to Swordmaster and Knight because of this, that Swordmaster puts out so much damage and the Knight of the Blazing Sun puts out so much utility for their group that you can overlook the Iron Breaker because of the difficulty it is in playing them. And another weakness for some, it can look like you're wearing your kitchen pots and pans on your body, but that's only in the beginning. Eventually, it gets a little bit better. What is their mechanic? So they kind of get two. They have their Grudge, and then they have their Oathfriend. Basically, the way the Grudge works is as the fight goes on, as it continues, you build your Grudge from 0 to 100, and this can be used on abilities and at different point totals at like 25, 50, 75, 100. Ability to become more powerful, gain additional effects. So you need to choose as the fight is going, what point total do you want? Do you want to use it at 25 and get a medium knockback? Do you want to use it at 100 and get a super long knockback? That puts the control in your hands. They also get their Oathfriend. They can put this on a friendly target and both gain extra Grudge from that, but also give them abilities and stat boosts and buffs and all that as well. What are the specializations on the Iron Breaker? They get the Path of Vengeance. This is your offensive abilities and your two-handed builds. You get your Path of Stone. This is defensive abilities and your more shield type buffs. And then you have your Path of Brotherhood. This is group buffs, crowd control, and utility. What are the classifying abilities on the Iron Breaker? You have your Cave In, or as it used to be called on live, Cave Win. It is a 3-second stun on your target, plus some pretty good damage over time as well. You have your Grumble and Mutter that we talked about earlier. This, you expend your Grudge to regen a pretty decent amount of health every 3 seconds for the duration of the ability, some good self-healing. And finally, you have Oathbound. You and your Oathfriend, the person you put your buff on, will gain 25% parry for 10 seconds. Great at keeping you alive and also keeping an ally alive as well. Just like the kind of play that the other tanks are good at, scenarios, group, ranked, warbands, PvE, you're pretty much good at everything except maybe running around by yourself. But playing a tank, you pretty much lock in that you are going to be playing support and you'll be with the rest of your team. So that about sums it up for Order Side, the Iron Breaker, Knight of the Blazing Sun, and the Swordmaster. Tune in for the next video, the final video in the series, Part 8 for Destruction, Tanks, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching, guys, and see y'all soon.